countries. And 61 countries have made pledges specifically on mitigation in the livestock sector. But one of the biggest challenges ahead, of course, will be tracking those commitments, being able to track progress on mitigation in particular, and doing so in two ways. One, to build international confidence in the transparency and robustness of that MRV, and two, to enable a bottom-up process where countries can define what MRV is most relevant to their production systems and their statistical agencies and their reporting protocols. Right? So we need both the international confidence, but the bottom will be greater than in the livestock sector, where we have 45% of the emissions in agriculture. So we know that Tier 1 methods don't do a very good job of capturing mitigation. So a country could be advancing quite a bit with reducing their emissions, but the MRV system, if it's Tier 1, will not necessarily capture that. And Tier 2 methods currently require some 10 to 13 variables, which often are not easily tracked in the developing world. So what to do and how to deal with this dilemma? CCAFS, FAO, and the GRA have a project in place to do a survey of different countries' practices, and we will be holding a workshop in February to examine how to improve MRV. And today I'm very pleased that we have 5 countries that will share their experience as part of this larger project on MRV, both innovations and problems that they're facing. And the idea is, how can MRV specifically capture mitigation? So the 5 speakers will speak for about 7 minutes each, and then we'll have at the end of all 5 speakers, we'll have 10 minutes for clarifying questions. Then we'll switch modes to the chat show, which I mentioned earlier, and my colleague Polly Eriksson from ILRI will lead that section. We'll close with a few words from our colleague Robin Bai from Kenya, and then I invite everybody to attend a reception that will follow. So it's my great pleasure to introduce as our first speaker, Walter Ohansabal from the Ministry of Agriculture in Uruguay.
Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you in particular to the organizers of this event for letting us share our experience, our problems, our needs in relation to the issue we are going to talk about, low carbon development in the beef cattle sector in Uruguay. Well, Uruguay is a livestock country. We dedicate more than 2/3 of the total area to grazing in natural grasslands, and we produce grass-fed beef for us, but mostly for international markets. So whatever happens with this sector is absolutely important. And it's so relevant, agriculture and livestock sector in Uruguay, that 75% of all national emissions come from agriculture. It may be one of the highest percentage among most countries. And if we look at the composition of agriculture emissions, we see that enteric fermentation is the first one, is the most significant source, but it is also very important, the emissions from N2O, nitrous oxidase, from the manure that is deposited on grassland by grazing cattle. Well, when we prepare our INDC, we discussed that given the importance of livestock emissions in our inventory, it was not possible to avoid considering what to do with emissions in our INDC. And we decided that the best strategy was to go for an approach based on reducing the emissions intensity, because we don't have technology available to produce more food with less emissions in absolute terms. But we have technology to produce more food with the same emissions, which means less emissions intensity. First question is our experience in improving activity data. Well, activity data are fundamental for MRV. And fortunately, our country has developed a national and totally digital livestock information system, not only for the purpose of the inventory, for many other purposes, but this resulted at an extraordinarily useful tool for our inventories. And we have high quality livestock statistics system. We have 100% traceability of the cattle herd with 2 tags, one electronic and one visual, and all animals are identified, and every movement the animals do from one farm to other farm or one farm to a slaughterhouse is very well tracked. So we know every day on real time how many animals and where are they. And farmers also have to do an electronic sort declaration. And in this declaration, they declare how many animals they have, how many heads per category. And we can disaggregate this information by at subnational level in small land local areas. So we have information on how many animals are in every of these small pieces of land. And they also declare the land use. And land use has provided to be extremely useful to infer what is the diet of the animals and to make good assumptions on the emission factors of animals that are on any of these pieces of land. So to calculate emissions and to monitor them, we need activity data and we need emission factors. It's like a bicycle. Bicycle needs 2 wheels, and MRV is a bicycle. With 1 wheel, with 1 move. We need the 2 wheels. Second question, what innovation have we used? Well, we use a spatially disaggregated information on cattle herd by category, diet quality, and composition. In that way, we can have tier 2 country-specific emission factors for enteric fermentation, and now we also have a tier 2 methane conversion factor. So we are 100% tier 2 in relation to emission factors for methane, and we have now, for the next inventory, N2O tier 2, which is also very important, and which was overestimating with the default one, was overestimating our emissions. How do we coordinate collection of data? Oh, well, sorry, I forgot to highlight that we are using FAOStat tool for QA/QC, or quality assessment and quality control, is extremely important in an inventory. And we have learned that FAOStat has tools that are very helpful to compare our information from the one for FAOStat and identify data that may be outliers, etc. And also, another very important thing we are doing in collaboration with FAO is to calibrate and validate a model, a tier 2 model that is GLIM. And this model is not only useful to assess, to estimate the emissions as we can do with the Excel sheet of the IPCC, but also to identify the impact of individual practices and to make projections. So it was a very useful tool for our INDC preparation, because in fact, if we want to reduce emissions intensity, there has to be technological change. And I only have 1 minute to say, how do we coordinate? Well, first, we have agricultural statistics that are one of the responsibilities of the Ministry of Agriculture. Second, agriculture and LULUCF greenhouse gas emissions are done by us in the Ministry of Agriculture. And we coordinate emission factors research with the National Agricultural Research Institute and the Faculty of Agronomy. And in this way, this facilitates a lot the convergence and the support to the inventory as a pillar of MRV, NDCs, and also NAMAs in the future. So reducing enteric methane emissions intensity through improved production efficiency and productivity in beef sector systems in Uruguay is our strategy. Thank you very much, and I fulfill the 7 minutes. Thank you. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming Agrippina Jenkins from the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock in Costa Rica.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Lini. Thank you to everybody that let us come here today and talk about livestock and MRV. So I will tell you a little bit of some data that is interesting before I go to the next slide. From Costa Rica, we have more than 1 million of cows or herd, and we have a production of dairy, double purpose, and beef. And also, we are a small country, therefore we have more than 37,000 farms, which compared to Uruguay or other countries is a bit less. But we also, this sector represents for us the 14% of the emissions of the total global of the country. And here's where I want to tell you a little bit. Those two, the first one that you see to your left, that is our national strategy for reducing carbon emission or low emissions on the livestock sector. There was a policy that it was declared by our Ministry of Agriculture and also signed by our Ministry of Environment. Therefore, it's a policy, a national policy. And from this one, also we have a national strategy on climate change. So we have the strategy of the national strategy of climate change, the strategy for the livestock sector, and therefore we have the livestock NAMA. That is the one that you will see to your right. Those are the conclusion from our NAMA, and it's the one that we're working right now. And we're collating data for our MRV from the NAMA. So we also have a pilot plan right now that covers more than 120 farms. They are for dairy, double purpose, and beef. And I'm going to tell you a little bit. And here's for us really, really important. And I would like to provide you with this information because I think sometimes when you see how to collect data or how to see it not only for livestock, but also for the whole country, sometimes it can be tricky. So this is what we have and been planning for a little bit of time. That is called in Spanish, CINAMEC. This system will collect the data for climate change that we need as a country that will report not only to the UNFCCC, but also for our needs, our goals. And that CINAMEC will have information not only from the subsector of agriculture, livestock, but also from our coffee sector or different sectors. That one will go to another, that is a sectorial level, as you can see them. That will have a different types of mitigation, adaptation, all that we can collect. That will go to the CINAMEC for climate change. The CINAMEC will go to CINIA, which is also acronym for Spanish. That one is for national territory. So as you can see, we can get information that is open source, and this will provide us with general indicators and protocols that will apply to the CINAMEC. Why do I share this with you? Because sometimes collecting data or how to see it at a national level can be tricky for all countries. And I can tell you, we have our experience with our forests collecting data. Therefore, we have learned from that experience. As you can see that, and sorry, it was cut out, but I will tell you about it. The CINAMEC has the mitigation, adaptation, finance, and co-benefits for us. In the first one, CINAMEC is the governance part where we can seek in support for definition roles, responsibilities. Also for the ability, what we call framework, we have the creation of this framework to establish all the interinstitutional arrangements. Why? Because we have the Ministry of Livestock, but Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock does not do what we call the inventory of emissions. That is done by our National Institute of Meteorology. And that institute, it belongs to the Ministry of Energy. Therefore, they're different ministries, so we need to have those institutional arrangements. And the platform that is going to be developed also seeks to have this in collecting data from the farms and to the system. And we need to create the system, because if you collect data that it will be in our perspective collated part from the farmers and part from our technicians on the land, and you need to provide it to another system, let's say downtown in San Jose, in our capital, there could be some information lost there. Or maybe we can make a double count in there of different information, not only for climate change, that's really important for us, but also for productivity and efficiency on the system, because that is also important. We need to have the livelihoods of our farmers to be preserved and be really a quality ones. What we need to capture mitigation is activity data to capture mitigation. We need information regarding all that is related to grass extension. We are working on that. Frequent data of cattle population, because we have our census, but we need more information to have the accurate, not every 15 or 20 years. It will be better if we have a frequent data. They're related to use of nitrogen fertilizer and other mitigation options that we can see. This is what we're doing right now. To your right, you can see what we do to capture some of the data that we use, and that is done in a national level. Therefore, Costa Rica has a tier 2 for livestock. And also, to your left, you can see what we capture for emissions regarding nitrogen oxide. Sorry if the translation is good. I will keep it there because I would like to tell you which are our challenges in 1 minute that I have left. 2 that we have identified as the major ones is to measure emissions on the value chain for livestock, not only for climate change, but to know how to make more efficient the systems. More efficiency, better livelihood, and let's say a little bit more money for our producers and farmers. And data collection, like I said, we need a system, not only for the one that I present you here, but for livestock, for the MRV of our NAMA. So I will keep it at that and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Zodu Eshetu from Ethiopia. He is the director of the Climate Science Center at Addis Ababa University.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is a very important event to share the experience we have on the livestock emission estimation in the livestock sector in Ethiopia. And just before my presentation, maybe you know that Ethiopia has the highest livestock population that amounts to more than 140 million, and from which 53 million is cattle. And from the cattle population, 32 million are the dairy cattle we have. Okay. Next slide, please. As a pilot study, we looked into the different production systems in the country. That is, we have agro-pastoral and pastoral small-scale farming system and commercial at the level of small scale and medium scale. And we looked at the different, the emission, we calculated the methane emission for the different production system. So the highest emission we have is about 55%, which is a rural mixed agricultural system, mainly limited in the highland areas above 1,500 meters. And the lowest or small emission is we have the small and medium commercial, which is again followed by the pastoral and agro-pastoral systems. So the largest is from agro-pastoral and small, medium mixed agricultural system. Next slide, please. So considering that, we looked into the different regions where is the highest maximum annual emission. The Oromia, which is the largest state in the country, is characterized by the highest emission, methane emission, and followed by the southern emission, which is also the second largest, and the Amara is the third highest emission in terms of greenhouse gas emission. Next slide, please. And we looked at the intensity data by production, which is explained in terms of carbon dioxide per kilogram milk produced. So the highest intensity we have is in the emission factor in the pastoral and agro-pastoral systems, and where the lowest intensity is in the small and medium commercial scale, which means there is high potential for emission reduction in the commercial sector. Next slide, please. Then we looked at the different production system, and the suggested technical mitigation intervention is manure management, feed management, and also increasing the productivity of the animal by introducing the disease control. So this increases the productivity. As the productivity is increased, the emission is reduced. Next slide, please. So what kind of activity data we used? We used multi-stage activity data. It's not really a straightforward emission estimation for the livestock sector, because the methane emission is not a direct product from the feed, but it is also has a close relationship with the production. The animal, I mean the cow, I mean with the milk and the meat production. So as activity data, we looked into the total cattle population, and particularly the daily population by production system, and the feed basket production by the production system, and parameters of feed material like crude protein and also digestibility. And we looked at also the cattle herd parameters, which deals with the health of the animal and also the days and the weight of the animals. Next slide, please. So those data sets we get from the National Statistical Agency and from the published research and also from the research experience. And then we looked at the emission factor again, which is activity data times the emission factor. For the emission factor, to estimate the emission factor, we looked again multi-stage emission factor derivation, which is derived from methane production per milk for beef milk, methane production per meat bull production. And here is, we face a constraints. One thing is that the livestock health affects the methane production. Feed quality is also affecting methane production and management, and also milk productivity. So there is no any uniformity in the data set for all production system. So there is no, I mean, it will be difficult to come up with one determined emission factor. For low emission production system, we have the problem that we have the IPCC probability reflection animal and some maintenance. But the problem here is that most of the large set of the animals we feed, they are used only for maintenance rather than for production. With production, it is easy to estimate the emission, but with maintenance, it is hard to determine the emission factor. Next slide, please. With institution coordinates, we work with those institutions. One is we are working with the Ministry of Livestock and Fishery for the extension agent, and university as a central coordinator, and also research institutes and small and medium scale farmers where we are collecting primary data, and development partners like USAID, and also the development association unit, which may be used as large scale commercial production. Next slide, please. With that, I thank you very much.
Okay, and our next speaker will be Bes Tisnamurti from the Indonesian Center for Animal Husbandry Research and Development.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to this session, and thank you for the organizer to invite Indonesia to share our experience about the MRV in livestock. Let me tell you a little bit about Indonesia. Maybe some of you don't know where Indonesia is. It's located in Southeast Asia with 13,000 islands, and the population of our livestock is not much. We have about 14 million beef cattle, less than 2 million of buffalo, and less than 1 million of dairy cattle. Those are the livestock composed in our country. But we have many of what you call that, poultry and other small ruminants. Okay. The first question is how we progress to date for the livestock emission factor using the tier 2. This activity has been done using the statistic data from the Directorate General of Livestock and Animal Health. And we also get the data from the experimental results from universities and other research institutes. And the indicator that been used for the calculation is the livestock population based on the type of the livestock, beef cattle, dairy, and buffalo, and also the subcategory. We divide into young animals, mature, and then calves. And also we measure also the feed intake, which is considered to be the different type of diet, and then also with the feed consumption. We also include the gross energy intake, such as the GA, content of the diet, and then the proximate analysis of from the another source of the feed information. And then we measure also the methane conversion ratio by first using the IPCC guidelines 2006, and then we measure the emission factor by local data combined with the IPCC in 2006. And this is our result. The upper caption is about the methane from the enteric fermentation. It's the blue line is for the tier 1, and the yellow line is for the tier 2. And then the below one is the methane emission from the manure, also showing similar trend. It's reducing for the tier 2. And we will see what makes it a little bit difference. We are also using the mitigation technologies for the enteric methane. The first one is the feed processing, and then the second one is the feed supplement, and the last one is the feed additive. All the feed additive used for the studies, for the research, are using the local feed stuff, then been explored from different kind of feeding. And this is one example. The extract saponin from Sapindus rarak can improve the average daily gain of the beef cattle, and then the Sapindus rarak for sheep can also improve the daily gain, improve the feed conversion ratio, but decrease the methane enteric emitted. From our next slides, it will see that by using the technology, the methane reduction after the technology intervention, we will see like the 15% reduction in the methane after the mitigation. This is the study from the all the methane emission from 2006 until we expect, after the intervention of the technology, like a 15% reduction can be expected started from the 2016. Okay, and other question is how we coordinate among agencies to get the data. Okay, to collect the data, actually we have collaboration with the Ministry of Planning Agency, and the focal point for the climate change resides in the Ministry of Forestry and Environment, and the Ministry of Agriculture with different Directorate General have collaboration also with local government. We have like sort of multi-layers government, and we also coordinate with the livestock farmers and also the extension people. And this is our institutional arrangement for the greenhouse gas inventory in Indonesia. It starts with the ministry of the institution, and then we inform also the industries as well, and then the local government. All the data collected with the pre-inventory development, and then we have local emission factors from research, university for livestock and rice cultivation and fertilizer. And we also have involved the expert and steering committee for the greenhouse gas inventory. And we also have several working groups from different ministries. And then we also have the Directorate General for Greenhouse Gas Inventory and MRV. And we report to the Ministry of Forestry and Environment for our activity for the livestock. And we coordinate also the inventory and the data compilation and management. And then we have the final GHG inventory to be submitted into the national GHG inventory report. So for the livestock sector, maybe it is still new into the whole system, but the rice cultivation and the fertilizer has been into the system, the national system, for the last 5 years. I think that's I can tell you, and more comment will be appreciated to improve our work. Thank you.
And our final speaker for the panel session is Alexander Berndt from Embrapa, the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation.
Thank you, Lini. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. It's a challenge to speak only for 7 minutes, but I will not be the one that doesn't make it. So what can I tell you about our livestock sector? We have the largest commercial beef cattle herd of the world, around 200 million heads. So livestock is an important sector for Brazil, and it consequently has a big contribution to our national emissions. We have our governmental institution responsible for collecting data. It's called IBGE, and we have our national census. We definitely know that we can improve this data collection, as Costa Rica mentioned, more frequently, and not only when the census happens. We are trying to work on that also. But we have reasonable, good data on national level. For the emission factors, we use the Tier 2 method to calculate the emission factors, plus some local emission factors, because as you can see in the picture, integrated systems are increasing in Brazil, and we can produce livestock, crops, and forest in the same area in the same time, and all these systems combine and interact in a synergic way that is not easy for the standard methods to estimate emissions under these conditions. So we have a lot of research working on that. If we combine data activity and emission factors, we have our national inventories. We have just released the third one just a few months ago. This is the official communication for Brazilian emissions and is available online, including in English. The national communication happens every 5 years, but in between we have our estimations or estimatives that are also published. And the Ministry of Science and Technology and Innovation is responsible for this report. This is the overview of the Brazilian emissions. We had a dramatic reduction since 2005 because we were able to control mainly illegal deforestation in the Amazon. But the task is not complete because we still have fluctuations on the deforestation rate, and we want to keep these under a reasonable level, preferably in a low level of deforestation. And also, as Uruguay said, we want to increase our efficiencies and then reduce our emission intensities. So we will produce more in less land. This is just a cut of our inventory. All the agriculture sector is responsible for 30%, 32% of the Brazilian emissions. And I should say that this is available online, and also the slides will be shared in the future, yes. So this is just part of the story. Energy is also 30%, and agriculture 32%, and from all the agriculture, enteric fermentation responds for more than a half of our emissions. So it is important to act on the livestock production systems. We have some coordinated efforts also, and for example, I can share that we have the national policy on climate change, we have the Brazilian Forum on Climate Change, the Brazilian Research Network on Global Climate Change, it's called Rede Clima, and the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation that with the previous groups are responsible for the national inventory. And we had support from the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, and the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. So they sponsored the ministry to organize all the data and to group all the experts to prepare the national inventories. And we have an important group. There is the sectoral plan for the mitigation and adaptation to climate change for a low carbon emission agriculture that is called the ABC plan. It's really a huge program in Brazil with a lot of money, with special funding for low carbon agriculture initiatives. And to check how this ABC plan is being implemented, we have also the ABC platform that is managed basically by a research group, and its mission is to converge data on greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, not only from the ABC plan, but other initiatives that are willing to reduce emissions, and to estimate the overall impact of the ABC plan. The platform has just been launched a few months ago, has just started to monitor this, but we will have really good results on the adoption of this ABC plan. There are two national banks that are responsible for this financial support, and probably those banks can also be the best data suppliers from adoption to fuel the ABC platform database. We have a lot of motivations to measure greenhouse gases, but the main is written here that we presented our INDCs at COP21, and if no other mitigation strategy is adopted, there is a tendency to increase our gross emissions after 2020 because of the economic growth based on fossil fuels and agriculture. We will produce more food for the growing population, and this will increase our gross emissions, but we want to intensify and get smaller or lower emission intensities. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you to all of the speakers. We now have about probably 5 minutes, if we want to stay on track, for clarifying questions from the audience, but then we're going to open it up to a much more interactive format. So this is really just for clarifying questions. Questions from the audience? Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for all this interesting presentation. I'm president of Mutual. We're actually introducing a new carbon reduction technology for the livestock industry on Thursday. And I had a question for all of you. It seems like as we are a COP of action, I'm just wondering what is the best solution that you've introduced in your livestock industry in your own country? And how have you been able to measure that impact? Because we've done research over the last 10 years, and the best solution that we came up with is our solution, and we've come up with a minimum of 30%. And it goes back to the lady from Indonesia. You introduced a solution that I don't know what the technical term was of that ingredient. But I'm just wondering, so what is the solution that you've tried, or the action that you've tried to implement in your country? And what sort of challenge have you faced, or how have you been able to measure that impact, the impact that you've had on reducing the methane emissions from the cows? Because I'm really, really interested to know this and compare it to what we're going to introduce on Thursday at lunchtime here at the COP. Thank you.
So I'm going to take a couple of more questions before we turn to our panelists. Questions? Question? Anybody? Yep.
So hello everyone, thank you panelists. I'm Bindu and I'm from Nepal. I have a question for all of you, let's say. Why do you think, I just want a concrete action, why do you think that the adaptation or mitigation in the livestock sector should be gender responsive? I mean, like, so there are so many reasons behind, but what is the concrete idea behind this? Thank you.
Great. Okay, I'm going to turn to the panelists. Who would like to start? Sorry? Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, we could not understand.
Why should the climate change adaptation or maybe the mitigation be gender responsive while considering the livestock production? Gender responsive.
Responsive to women and men.
Yep.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Alex, go ahead.
Okay, I can start with, what is your name? Sorry, Michael. Okay, I can speak from the Brazilian perspective. If you have an additive to give to livestock, this animal has to have access to a trough. In Brazil, most of the animals are grazing systems, so they have only mineral salt and sometimes some supplement. So the strategy to act directly in the rumen to mitigate needs to happen under feedlot conditions, or in the most intensive dairy systems, or in the feedlot. In Brazil, less than 10% of the herd is confined in feedlots. So it's a strategy. We have different additives that can reduce 30 to 60% of the daily methane emission, but only a small part of the herd is able to use it. On the other hand, if you increase the system itself as more efficient, if you increase reproduction rates, if you increase health, pasture management, and you increase or you shorten you increase the growth and shorten the life of the animal, it can be slaughtered earlier, you can save emissions also. So there are different strategies, and I don't know what is your main product, but this should be considered.
Okay, and I think, unfortunately, we only have time for probably one more speaker. Okay, Wilkes, go ahead.
On to Michael. Your name, Michael? Okay. You are asking about the rarak. The ingredient in the rarak is saponin, actually. So it reduces the metagenic bacteria, and then use the nutrients for the growth of the animal. That's the basis, actually. And we can extract some other saponin from different sources of the feed ingredients in Indonesia. So we we use many local feed ingredients to reduce the methane emission from the livestock.
Okay, thank you. So I think we'll have time for the the speakers to probably answer your questions more fully in this next part of the session. Thank you. I'm going to turn the session over now to Polly Eriksson from the International Livestock Research Institute.
Okay, so thank you to the speakers. So I've got some discussion questions. And the way I want to run this session is I'll first give a chance to, it's a bit bizarre. First, I'll give a chance to the panelists to answer my question, but if anyone in the audience wants to add something or feels that they'd like to push the participants a little bit more, please just raise your hand, and either Juliana or Dinesh, can you get the roaming microphone back? Will come and answer. So this is really a chance for some interaction. So the first question that we're interested in, which is asking you maybe to step back a little bit from the details that you provided in your presentation, is if I said, if over the next 2 years I gave you the chance to commission some work on an improved MRV for the livestock sector in your country, what's the specific problem that you'd like that work to solve, that you're facing? We've heard some comments about that it's very heterogeneous in Ethiopia. We can't find the detailed data that we want to represent that heterogeneity. Alexandra talked a little bit how in Brazil they're using local data to capture some of the issues around integrated systems. But what's the specific problem? So we'll start here with Uruguay and see how we go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I would say that our main problem or question is beyond activity data or emission factors. Okay. Yes, is beyond understanding what is the gap of productivity we have, what is the impact of different management practices that we can implement with farmers in order to produce better, in order to produce more, in order to produce respecting the environment, and minimizing the emissions intensity and maximizing the carbon sequestration in soils or woody biomass. So we need to further understand what is the combination of practices that produces the best performance in terms of productivity, efficiency, emissions, and removals. This is the main challenge, because with activity data, we have already a good situation, as I explained. We have already tier 2 emission factors. So now the question we want to answer is, what shall we do in order to reduce, not just to monitor, in order to monitor, reduce emission, not the business as usual, but reduce emissions. Thank you.
Very, very interesting. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. So you asked for which will be the solution. That's really hard to answer. But I would say we have 3. I will say also management and measuring management of the impact of the technologies that you're providing to the producers, or the producers are already taken in, but also how to provide the transfer of technology and capacity building to the producers and see if they're actually getting what they need or the feedback back to us. And also, of course, collating that data that is already being taken care of all to the farmers that are already making the transition, collecting data on a farm level. It's really, really expensive.
Yes.
Okay, I think I could look into the experience what we have during the time when we were conducting that pilot study. And in the result, we found that even within the same system, we found large variation in the greenhouse gas emission. That is, for example, the highest variability we found in the agro-pastoral and the pastoral system. And also in the mixed farming system, we found also large variance, where in the small and medium commercial, the variability is not so high, because this shows that the feed is controlled and the health is controlled, which attributes to the large variation. Where we don't have that control on the health, on the feed and the manure and feed management, that we found there is large variation. So in that case, in order to have well improved MRV system, maybe if we use a tier 1 system, it might be underestimated, and even the tier 2 system might not work. So that means we need to work on the tier 3 MRV system in order to reduce those the large variation. With large variation, we don't have any confidence on the MRV system. That's my reflection.
Okay, to my point of view, at least we have to look from the sides of the farmers, It's like smallholder farmers in Indonesia, which has only average ownership of like 3.5 heads of beef cattle, and where some of them do not have enough feeds for feeding the cattle. There are things that kind of thing like feeding is something that need to be put into attention. And also I consider also the system itself, how we can get the data from the farmers. We have like multi-layers government system. We have the provincial, we have district, sub-districts, and we have many smallholders. So we have like a system how to get the data with involve of the farmers and also the extension people, and then collect the data into the up layers. Not only that, our government also have a program on what you call that, concentrates for feed mill and concentrates for the smallholders, and we also have a program for biogas for the beef cattle in most of the provinces. So getting all the information by involving the extensions is another way to get the data for the emission, I think. Thank you.
From my point of view, to improve the MRV, we need to improve our data activity collection more frequently and more detailed, because we have initiatives to neutralize emissions. As Uruguay said, we have systems that can sequestrate so much carbon in the soil that can neutralize the emissions from methane and nitrous oxide. We have a project, it's called neutral carbon meat, that has just been implemented, that will check these specifically on these integrated systems, because in the integrated systems you have carbon in the soil under the grassland, and you have carbon in the trees, in the timber, that both sequester the emissions. But again, our activity data needs to be sensible enough to detect these improvements frequently. So if you have a farm and you decide to adopt the integrated system, what was your baseline emission? And then how is it improving year by year, since the trees are growing, your management is increasing, is getting better, how the system can be checked frequently and report these emissions or these reductions. This is a challenge. Yeah.
Any comments or observations from the audience? Yes, sir, right here in the front, and then the blonde woman. Thank you. Just, yeah, 1, 2, and then we'll come to the second row. So we'll take these two questions together. Or no, sorry, it's not questions anymore, it's comments. So we'll go one by one. Yes. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much. Yes, it was very interesting, the different presentation that we had. But nobody of you gave indication about how much methane emission per kilo of milk or per kilo of meat produced. That's the first question, just to get have information and to compare with different systems. For instance, our colleague from Ethiopia said that you have very variability in one system, and more industrial system you have less variability. But what are really the differences? So that you can see perhaps based on this, maybe take decision of what to favor and what to try to reduce. So, and that's the first question I have, but for all of you. And the second question I have, it's for both our colleague from Uruguay and from Brazil. You are dealing with neutralizing the emissions of cows by carbon sequestration. So, and you mentioned it's quite important, the difference of carbon sequestration in the soil and in the trees. So, but two different questions and problems in that case, because when you look at sequestration of in the soils, just do you have any idea of the increase of grassland that you have in your country, increase of area of grassland in your country? Because that's very important, because at the very beginning when you switch from cropland to grassland, of course you sequester quite a lot of carbon, but after 25 years it's almost nothing. So I mean, that's what's one very important thing, because but if you just have, you don't have trees and you have a
right, sir,
grassland after
gonna ask you
25
to-
years, yes, but it's very important because we all
Yeah, no,
speak
but there's
about
a whole
this.
room
Yes,
of people
okay.
who want to ask
but
questions. Thank
these
you.
two questions, you know, how to measure it and how many cows you have to reduce if you have more trees, or can you have as many cows with the same number of trees? That's our issue. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take maybe Uruguay and then Brazil on that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, if we look at an integrated system, we have to look at carbon sequestration in soils, because improving the management of the grasslands, if the land is degraded to a certain extent, can sequester carbon in soil. You cannot sequester carbon in soil forever. You can sequester until this pool is saturated. So the potential for carbon sequestration is mostly on degraded lands, and many of the lands in my country have been degraded by two processes: overgrazing, which is normal practice in my country, and also because in parts of the country, because of many years of agriculture. So there is the potential to fill this gap that has been lost due to bad practice of management of grassland or cropland. Regarding how to compensate emissions with carbon sequestration, well, we have to take into account that emissions from methane and carbon sequestration are all biological emissions. And biological emissions are also difficult to measure because they depend on many factors and many conditions, and in situ conditions. And the amount of emissions of non-CO2 gases also depends on which factor you use to multiply methane to convert it into CO2 equivalent. So to give a number of how many kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilo of meat is a tricky issue, because it will depend on a series of assumptions. Thank you. Thank you for the interesting question.
Yes, Brazil.
Yeah, fully agree with Walter. Walter is exactly the same in Brazil. Once we achieve the pool of carbon in the soil, we will need the additives that can reduce emission. And if we use them together, we can maybe enlarge the time that we can save carbon in the soil. And directly related to trees, our estimations mention that from 10 to 20 trees per animal you can compensate. So for each animal you need from 10 to 20, so it's a 100% in uncertainty, but it's around that 15 trees per animal.
All right, let's go to the next question. I believe the blonde woman in the front. And if you could just introduce yourself before you ask your question. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Judy Searle. I'm from Cape Town Television and my Mother Channel TV, which broadcasts on the internet. We have got a channel called ENN on Mother Channel, and it covers the news, the latest things that are coming out on the environmental front always. A little while ago, what came out was that the sea phytoplankton are dying, and therefore the oxygen levels in the sea will be zero, well not zero, but very low, too low to support life by 2030. So of course this makes the microbes on the land that much more important, because they're the only thing that can actually increase in number fast enough to take some carbon dioxide out of action fast enough to be able to cool the planet enough to help their brothers in the sea. But the problem is, how would you think that cattle at this moment could actually end up being more important as a producer of extra food for microbes that we're trying to encourage at top speed all over the world to grow in number, because they can hold much more carbon in their bodies than all the other landmass on the sea? Or do you think that they're still going to be more negative because of their methane contribution? I just raised the question. It was more a comment than a question. Nobody can answer that question, but it raised, when you started talking like you were, it actually made me feel, hey, this is going to become an interesting point, because we do need to feed those microbes if we want to get them to flourish in the way that they need to in time.
think I'll take a couple more comments unless somebody specifically, yes, sure.
I think the question raised from here about the emission production per kilogram liter, we have done that, and that was in the order of less than 20 to 45 kilogram carbon dioxide over 250 to 900. That means for the commercial, we have 900 kilogram milk production with 20 kilogram carbon dioxide carbon dioxide equivalent emission. So the largest highest emission we have in the small scale and in the small scale farming system, which is 45 over 20 and less than 20 kilogram cow milk production. And the other one is with impact, reducing the impact. That one thing is that we have to, if we use methane as a resource, methane is energy, and if we lose it, it brings or it results in environmental pollution. And that means using energy. Using energy is one important aspect, reducing the methane. It's not only methane, but also the carbon dioxide emission and nitrous oxide emission. These are resources. So if we use them as a resource, that is one important aspect, reducing the impact, and encourages small scale or large scale farmers for effective manure management and feed management in order to reduce the methane. And one way of using as a resource is, for example, biogas, using methane as energy and reducing carbon dioxide, which can be used as soil organic matter, and nitrous oxide, which can be used also as nitrogen fertilizer, reducing the inorganic fertilizer for which the farmers, they don't have the capacity to purchase. So that is really, it plays two roles. One is mitigation and the other one is adaptation.
Okay, yes, sir. And then I'm going to move on to my next question. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Siniro from Imaflora, Brazil. I'd like to hear some comments about the country's plan, or how do you visualize the verification part of your MRV system? It's a very practical question.
Thank you. Yeah. How do you visualize the verification part of your MRV? That's an excellent question. Yes. Who would like to tackle it first? Yes.
Well, we visualize the MRV system. I usually look into how the MRV system is very complex. We make it very complex unnecessarily. It is very complex unnecessarily what the experts are thinking of. So if we make it more robust and focusing on the activity data and also determining the emission factor rather than thinking at global level, if we focus at the local level, the MRV system will be improved. But we should not think of bringing a junk of all complex factors into the system, which is not necessarily for MRV system.
So your solution is simple, makes the verification.
Yeah, we have to make it simple. Okay. What factors are contributing really to the emission? But we bring a lot of factors that do not have any significant impact or contribution to the emission, and that makes really unnecessarily the MRV system more complex. The more it is complex, the countries, or many countries, they are not working in compliance what is needed for that.
Thank you. Who else would like to take a stab at that? Yes, Agrippina.
I do agree with you. If you make the system really, really complex or make indicators really, really specific, we have we have a lot of different productions in our country. Even though we're really small, there are different type of production. Therefore, if you cannot measure what we do in the capital, for example, well, you don't have cattle belt, but what we do in other areas like the coastal area or the upper side area as the same. So you would need indicators for each area. That would be really difficult to collect data and also expensive for us. But we also have been thinking about external verification on a national level. So this data will be collected part from farmers, part from our extensionist system, and also from our national statistics, actually the institution that makes the census. So in that case, you will need an external verification to tell you, well, you're capturing this, but this one, as you say, does not contribute as much as you think. Thank you.
Anyone else? Walter, do you want to say anything? Or no? Because I have a follow-up question to that. So the two speakers have said make the verification system simple. But then what if I turn that around and say to you, okay, but now I want to know, how has this improved the transparency of your estimates, right? Because isn't that transparency supposed to make it easier for you to use your MRV to attract climate finance, which is another issue that none of you have addressed. So if I could put that challenge out there for you. Do you agree with that statement? I mean, is solid verification and transparency actually the key to attracting that climate finance with your MRV? What do you think about that? Hey, Ethiopia's out of the gate, but then I'm gonna pick on Indonesia and Brazil, who are being very quiet down there at the other end.
Well, the MRV, there is no any debate about verification and validation. It should be there. So when we are coming with a project for climate finance, we need to have first a validation about that project, which deals with what kind of methodology we are going to use. And then following that type of methodology we used at the initial phase of the project will be done when it is verified by the third party. So there is no debate about the use of third party. Third party should be there.
Okay.
If it is not there, that means we are not complying with the transparency. So I don't mean that neglecting the verification or third party, but the whole system of the emission estimation is very complicated and very complex. So even for such complex methodology, we need to have very expensive verifiers. So these countries, they don't have money to invest on very expensive consultants, you know? So if it is simple and very direct, so anyone can verify it very easily. So it does, I mean, that's the objective of verification, is not making more complex, but making it more transparent.
Very interesting point. So I have Agrippina and then Walter, and then I'm still coming down to the end of the table. Yes.
Thank you. I think that not only is the process for the MRV and getting the finance for climate, I also think that if we're trying to make in Costa Rica our system efficient, then we need to measure that. It's not only a matter of transparency for finance. Of course, we want transparency, but for all, because it will provide us data of what we're doing is correct, if it has a benefit, and if it's been efficient and more efficiently productive for farmers and for our production.
Excellent, excellent. So it's really the co-benefit, yeah. Or one way of putting it. Yes, Walter.
Thank you. Well, my comment on transparency, as we are seeing it in my country, is that it's a process. We cannot become transparent all of a sudden from one year to the other. We can go into the direction of continue improving the transparency. It's not something automatic. And if we look at the inventories of the developed countries, we can see clearly how it took many, many years for them to get more and more transparent. They couldn't do it from one year to the other. And imagine in case of developing countries, it's even more difficult. But what can we do to decrease the cost of verification? And we have the experience of afforestation, reforestation, CDM, in which all the process of methodology and verification was extremely costly and contributed to kill the idea. Is that we can calibrate and validate models that work at local level. So if we have this, and this is a job to do by national research institutes that offer validated and calibrated models that avoid very extensive or very costly sampling, for example, and going to many farms, because there is high variability in the emissions between farms. There is high variability in the rate of carbon sequestration. So if we do not, we base our verification, our reporting on sampling, and then verification will be also very complicated. So we have to produce tools that are simple and that reduce uncertainties as much as possible.
Excellent, thank you, super interesting. Yes, Beth.
Okay. I again would like to look at the system first. You know, as Ethiopians say, make it simpler. So I think by looking at the feed consumption and then the breed of the animal, the livestock, and then the feeding types, it's simple, I think. And then we for the rice cultivation and fertilizer has already the system in Indonesia. So we are thinking of putting these simple indicators into their data and then how often they will get the data. For instance, every 3 months, every month, and then we will have like areas for checking. You know, we have 34 provinces. We have like 1,500 villages, something like that. And we will choose only in the center for the livestock, you know, not all, but only in the center of the livestock. And then we'll put the monitoring system in that area. That's, yeah, that's my thinking of that. But for finance for the climate, I think I have to hear from other countries because I haven't heard any experience on that. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Then I'll come back to the audience. Yes, absolutely.
From the national point of view, I agree with what is said, but I want to bring another perspective from the private sector. If a private sector wants to finance low carbon production systems, especially in Brazil, there are so many different kinds and different types of production systems that for sure one of these is able to provide those credits or to reduce emission and access this finance. So maybe the private sector is a driver for this adoption in some specific regions and production systems.
Brilliant. Okay, so I have this young man in the second row who's been waiting very patiently. So if Dinesh perhaps could give him the microphone, that'd be great. He's just coming on this side.
My name is Matthew Shepp. I'm with Aotearoa Youth Leadership Institute New Zealand, and I'm a teaching and politics graduate. My question's a question for whoever on the panel wishes to answer, or the whole panel. In your presentation, you highlighted a need to adopt agricultural practices that provide more efficient yields, both in terms of output and reduction of environmental impact. While all carbon reductions should be praised, it is not possible to retain a safe global average temperature while maintaining global livestock levels at even a fraction of what they currently are. And we need to be exploring viable alternatives with urgency. Has your government considered shifting its long-term agricultural focus away from livestock and towards crop yields that have significantly lower carbon and land footprints and which have similar or even improved nutritional profiles?
Is anyone prepared to answer that? Yeah, okay, Brazil, yeah.
I don't know if I captured all the question, but ruminants have a big advantage, and they can transform straw in milk and meat. So this is a big strength of the ruminants, and we need to use that for feeding human beings. I believe in that. We don't depend directly on grains, especially in our case. And ruminants have this ability that we need to explore it in a good sense of saying explore it. Yeah.
Walter, did you want to?
Yes, it's a good question. It's an important question, and but in the same line as Brazil, the colleague from Brazil was saying, we have to be aware that the world has some 3.4 billion hectares of grasslands that are not suitable to produce grains. So in these ecosystems, herbivores are the natural animals that can transform grass into beef or into meat or wool or whatever. So I would introduce this consideration to your question, that we need to do something with the huge amount of grasslands that are not suitable for cropping. In the case of cropland, and if it is efficient or not to dedicate grains to feed animals and then to eat animals fed by those grains, well, this is a discussion that I think we can do. But in our country, we have 70% of grasslands that we cannot grow no wheat, no sorghum, no maize, no nothing, because only grassland can grow there. So what are we going to do if we don't have cattle? Thank you.
Okay, there is a gentleman in the third row who had his hand raised. Here in the blue shirt. Yep.
Thank you. Mestor from the Danish Agricultural and Food Council. Well, I just have a comment and then a question, a very short question. But first of all, I think the fact is that, of course, we need to utilize all the possibilities of carbon sequestration. And I think the panel agrees on that. Then when it comes to different feed additives, a point from the panel is that it's not possible because of the extensive systems that are in the countries, for instance, the extensive grazing of the cows or the cattle. And then finally, we have a third point, which is from Ethiopia, sorry, focusing on utilizing slurry and manure for biogas, which is not possible in an extensive grazing system because the cows are obviously on the field. So just my comment is, and shouldn't we intensify our food systems? And shouldn't we, in those countries, in some kind of way, try to intensify the way that you produce milk and meat, etc.? For instance, by using stables, or I don't know exactly how it works in Brazil or Uruguay, etc. So, but that was my comment. Then just a short question is, we're talking about how we can implement these MRVs and all these other kind of instruments. But which actors are going to be activated to do this? I mean, because we have some governmental representatives here, and someone, I think it was Alexandra, mentioned that the private sector, and the private sector might be very important. So do you see a role for dairies and slaughterhouses in actually trying to reach out for the farmers? Thank you.
Excellent question. Yes, and I already see Agrippina ready to answer. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. In our experience, for example, our national policy regarding livestock on low emission was all built with part of private sector. It was their representatives and also farmers telling us what they want. From the private sector, for example, the biggest dairy company was there for us, telling us what they like to see. Also, the Corporation of Livestock that represents the farmers, and also the Chamber of National Dairy Production was there to help us out. So it was a public and private policy. And also on the field, we have the pilot plant for our NAMA right now. And that's where you listen to what producers are saying. And that's why I raised the point earlier about technology transfer and capacity building for the farmers. And also these farms will become schools, because what better way to teach other farmers than their neighbors, telling them, you know what, I did this and this technology, and they're working. And there's not like this fear of losing what they already have as a farmer. Because we are, as compared to other countries, we have small farmers. And these small farmers have families that depend on this. So we cannot only impose policy, but we're constructing with them because they need the efficiency, as I made a point earlier. So I think that might answer from our side your question.
Thank you, Walter. Yeah, Walter, and then Zidane. Yeah.
To what Agrippina has said, and in relation to your question on why not thinking on intensifying production, concentrating animals, confining them in order to get some benefits. I think that we have to be aware of that. When you intensify it in that way, normally production is more dependent on fossil fuels and on other elements that are derived from fossil fuels as certain types of inputs. A second aspect is that we have to look at all environmental impacts, or at least at the main ones. If we see only climate change, but we don't see impact on water quality, if we don't see impacts on biodiversity, on other aspects of the environmental footprint, then our decisions could be biased. We could do something that is better for climate, maybe, I'm not sure, but could be very bad for other aspects of the environment that are also very relevant. So let's have into consideration the broader landscape in which climate action or responses have to be set.
Okay, and then I'll take one more. Yes.
Of course, right now we have very extensive system of the livestock farming system, but we are moving toward this more intensive, because within the area of climate change, is a extensive system of the livestock system doesn't work, because it increases the vulnerability of the society and the vulnerability of even the resource to climate change. So we are moving toward the extensive, and we have the livestock strategy is looking into the mechanisms how to intensify that sector. It's not only intensifying the livestock also, but also there are other benefits. That means increasing the industrialization of the livestock sector, which is moving towards the value addition. So all those really very important aspects, or very good avenue for example, using the livestock product as a resource. One of the resource is a livestock product resource is a methane, for example, and the manure. So these are the resource for soil fertility and as well as the energy. So the large population in the rural areas, they use fuel wood. That means using methane is as energy sources, reducing the forest degradation, enhancing also the landscape carbon sequestration. And therefore, I don't see that because we don't use the existing systems, extensive way of farming system in the future. So it will be changing into more intensive system. But the important aspect with MRV, when looking into the livestock system, which is not part of the emission factor, is demanding from the climate finance perspective is the measuring boundary. Maybe that's very complex for the livestock, even it is becoming complex for the forestry sector when we are thinking of the permanency and leakage. In the livestock sector, that will be very much more than the forestry sector. So unless otherwise these issues are addressed, they don't have any contribution to the emission. The boundaries and leakage and permanence, it doesn't have any contribution to the emission. And therefore, these are very complex.
I'm just going to take one more question from the woman in the third row with the bob and the bangs. Did you have your hand up? Yeah. Yeah, that'll be the last question we have time for. Yeah.
Thanks. I just had my name is Carolyn Jones from the National Farmers Union of England and Wales, and here with the World Farmers Organization delegation. I had a question about the inventory. A couple of questions. One, whether you think we're asking too much of the greenhouse gas inventory to cover, to capture the range of practices the farmers are making. And secondly, how robust do you think those inventories are as the climate changes? Because clearly emissions factors will always change. Thank you.
Excellent. That's a great question to close on. So, Walter, I cut you off, but if you want to make a comment and perhaps respond to that, and then say what you wanted to say before.
Yeah, I had a comment on the intensification aspect. I think that for Brazilian situation, intensification until a certain level will be good, but not too much, because you will depend on all those inputs, grains, fossil fuel, and you will lose the possibility to sequestrate carbon in the grassland and in the forest, in the integrated systems. And in our country, we have millions of hectares of areas devoted to livestock. If we intensify all those, we will fill the world with meat, and the price will be so cheap that will not pay the farmer. So the market will regulate also how intensified you will be. If you produce so much that the price is so low, it's not profitable, it's not sustainable also. So we will not intensify a lot and everywhere. And regarding the inventories, I agree that at least in our case, our inventory is not sensible enough to detect all the particularities of the systems. And I doubt if these will be necessary. I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah. Unfortunately, I've been told we have to stop. Okay. But if yes, please, we're going to have a little reception outside afterwards so we can add some more about this. And am I allowed to let Agrippina say one tiny thing? Okay.
Is that we didn't answer the question from the young women regarding gender responsive, and I think that was really, really important. That's the only thing I will take.
Great, thank you.
2 seconds. Costa Rica, in the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock, we have a gender program that is not only for livestock, it's for the whole sector. And it's taking care of that. And if anybody wants information from them, we can share it, and also with our panelists. That would be
brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so I think I'm handing. Oh, sorry. Right, I'm forgetting my responsibilities. We now have a very special treat to close our session, which is that Robin Mbai, who is the head of climate change for the State Department of Livestock in the Ministry of Agriculture in Kenya. And we've asked Robin, who is from a country that is also committed to looking at livestock in its NDC and has just drafted its own dairy NAMA, to offer a few remarks from his own perspective about where he thinks we are in terms of MRV in the livestock sector. Not a very tall order, Robin, but please do come up.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Lini. I want to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank CCAFS, FAO, ILRI, and other partners in organizing this session. And more so because, as she has mentioned, they have strongly supported us in developing a dairy NAMA for Kenya. It's at an advanced stage, and I think more will be discussed in this forum, particularly during this COP22, other forums. My assignment here gives me an opportunity, and I think privileged also, to learn more on what other countries are doing, because having to develop a dairy NAMA, most of the issues that have been mentioned here link up with all what we have been discussing on interventions in addressing emissions around the value chain, particularly in this case, the dairy sector for Kenya. I've just been told to give a summary of what we have been discussing here, and therefore I will go point, and I hope within 4 minutes I'll be able to summarize the issues that have emerged. Well, some of them I may not have captured, but one of them is that that came out very strongly is a need for coordination of stakeholders in addressing emissions from livestock, particularly at the national level. And we also need to develop MRV systems, reliable, accurate, that would build on confidence in international forums that addresses the issues of emissions reductions. We have also noted that most countries use Tier 1 with a few data from Tier 2, and that means there is a lot of room for us and opportunity to address accurate gathering or collecting of accurate data for the purposes of being accurate in terms of getting the important information on emissions. We have also found that most of the countries are driven by the fulfillment of countries to submit their NDCs currently. As we are told in the forum, during the opening forum, I think about 100 countries have ratified their high NDCs to NDCs. What's the motivation, the driving force? And therefore, in these NDCs, there are a lot of factors related to addressing reduction of emissions. And more so from Kenya, I think we have mentioned climate smart agriculture to be one avenue. There are issues that in climate smart agriculture that we are going to address, one of them being the dairy NAMA. Most of the countries also have a lot of livestock, particularly going by the presentations that we have had, and we have realized that they drive the economy of the countries. But then we also realize at the same point that they are major emitters of greenhouse gases. We have also noted that there need to be a lot of research to be carried on, particularly on additives that would help in addressing the large amounts that comes from agriculture sector, particularly in livestock. We have also noted that there's need for countries to develop policies and strategies as key driving documents in interventions that address emissions, and more so giving direction towards use of MRV or developing MRV systems in their countries. We have also noted that there's a need for development of emissions, MRVs, particularly targeting the different production systems in each country, and more so in livestock, because we use different methods in doing this, and therefore in development of MRVs, we need to cite out some of the issues that come out even as challenges. There's also noted various interventions required in livestock, along the livestock value chains, to be able to measure emissions accurately. And I remember somebody mentioning how much a liter of milk can produce in terms of carbon dioxide. The information I have got indicates that the average worldwide is between 3 to 8 kilograms of carbon equivalent per kilogram of milk. But there are countries who are producing only 1.7 kilogram of carbon equivalent per kilogram of milk. For us in Kenya, it's 3.7, and we feel we have still the potential to carry out interventions that would reduce this to a lower level. We have also noted that, I'm told to stop, but I think I'll rush very fast. MRV should be made simple and not complex so that countries can easily capture data. However, due to different indicators and production systems, it remains a challenge. It's also a process that need to continue progressively, and therefore, in order for us to build confidence, there's need to focus a lot and be accurate on this, and require a lot of research in this line, particularly in collecting data. There's also a mention of use of opportunities for carbon sequestration in MRV systems. I think, thank you very much. That is all that I was able to capture. Thank you.
And with that, I'd like to say a very, very warm thanks to all of our speakers. Excellent presentations, and to you as well for excellent questions. Thanks. If you don't have it already, we have a brochure about this topic, as well as a summary of CCAFS-related research on this topic that has been placed on various chairs, but is also on a table outside. A reception is now available in case you'd like to follow up with any points. The presentations will be on the CCAFS website, as well as on the, I guess, the POCON site. So thank you, everybody. Yes, thank you. Yeah.